The regular meeting of the Capital Long Range Improvement Committee will now begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeffrey Strand. I'm the chair of the Capital Long Range Improvements Committee. Before we begin, I'd like to note that this meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota statute section 13D.021 due to the declared local health pandemic. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call a roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum. And this is March 30, 2022.
Okay. Thorborjorn,
Present.
Zachariah Aiden. Jonathan Ahn.
Here.
Lynn Beard.
Present.
Bernstein.
Here.
Steve Brandt. Vice Chair Willie Bridges.
Present.
James Brown.
Present.
Cunningham.
Here.
Engel. Foster.
Here.
Iman Gallagher. William Graves.
Here.
Hi, Gudmustad.
Just in the nick of time here.
Hustad. Katie Jones. Matt Kazinka.
Here.
Richard LaRoe.
Here.
Erica Motter.
Here.
Dan McConnell reported he was going to be absent. Jake McCormick.
Here.
Miller.
Dan Miller is here.
George Montague. Todd Schumann.
Here.
Or Jeff Strand.
Present.
Rena Stratton.
Present.
Oh. Eric Wan.
Present.
Total of
Gail-
19.
Gallagher was just readmitted. If they dropped out or they didn't.
Hi, yeah,
Gallagher.
I'm present. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
And
A total of
George.
20.
Sorry, George Montague is in the lobby and now entering.
George
Hi.
Montague.
This is Beth Toso. I didn't hear my name called.
Beth Tosu present.
Present.
And George Montague present.
Yep.
Okay.
Hi.
So it's 22 present.
Thank you, clerk. Point of inquiry for the staff to follow up later. Is Mr. Brandt still a member of the committee since he was elected to the Board of Estimate and Taxation? So maybe just
he is no
Okay.
no longer a member.
Okay.
So I think we're just wire crossed.
okay. Good to know. That's what I thought. Thank you. With that, we'll proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative management system, sometimes called LIMS, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. And then we'll proceed to the proposed agenda. So the city staff had published the agenda, prior meeting minutes, etc. So for the agenda, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Will you state your name after the motion and after the second?
Bernstein, so moved.
Is there a second?
Bridges second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Bernstein Bridges for approving the agenda. Any questions on the agenda? Any discussion? Not seeing any hands raised, so all in favor, or I guess we do have to have a roll call vote. Sorry, getting into the swing of things, so the clerk will call the roll.
Borjorn Adam, Jonathan On,
Aye.
Beard,
Aye.
Bernstein,
Aye.
Billy Bridges,
Aye.
James Brown,
Aye.
Cunningham,
Aye.
Engel, Foster,
Aye.
Amon Gallagher,
Aye.
William Graves,
Aye.
Gamastad,
Aye.
Katie Jones,
Aye.
Lisa Hustad, Matt Kazinka,
Aye.
Richard LaRoe,
Aye.
Erica Motter,
Aye.
Jake McCormick,
Aye.
Dan Miller,
Aye.
George Montague,
Aye.
Schumann,
Aye.
Jeff Strand,
Aye.
Trina Stratton,
Aye.
Oso,
Aye.
Juan,
Aye.
23 ayes.
The agenda is adopted. I believe just the clerk can note for the record that Michael Erlinson is a newly appointed member pending confirmation, I believe. And want to make note of that. So we also have the meeting minutes from June 30, 2021. So those were in the published agenda and meeting material. So if there's a motion to adopt the minutes from June 30, 2021, we'll do so. Again, state your name with the motion and the second.
So moved, Erica Motter.
Second.
George Montague, so moved.
So we have Motter motion, Montague second. If there's no discussion, the clerk will call the roll on approval of the minutes from June 30, 2021.
Thor Adam.
Aye.
Zachariah Aiden. Jonathan On.
Aye.
Jocelyn Beard.
Aye.
John Bernstein.
Aye.
Vice Chair Willie Bridges.
Aye.
James Brown.
Aye.
Luke Cunningham.
Aye.
Engel. Amity Foster.
Aye.
Gallagher.
Aye.
William Graves.
Aye.
Gamustad.
Aye.
Lisa Hustad.
Aye.
Katie Jones.
Aye.
Matt Kazinka.
Aye.
LaRoe.
Aye.
Otter.
Aye.
Jake McCormick.
Aye.
Dan Miller.
Aye.
George Montague.
Aye.
Schumann.
Aye.
And
Sound cut out. Was that Strand? I vote aye.
Katrina Stratton,
Aye.
Beth Toso,
Aye.
Eric Wan,
Aye.
24 ayes.
Minutes are adopted. Moving on the agenda to the presentation, section 4. So good afternoon, fellow CLIC members, new and returning. We're pleased to present an onboarding orientation presentation along with the city staff presentation on the finance and property services, logistics, budget contacts, etc. So Vice Chair Willie Bridges and I will be covering the onboarding presentation. So we'll try to make this fairly fast. It's a refresher for most members, and you'll have the material to review at your convenience. So next slide, please. So the key purpose of CLIC annual process is to hear, discuss, vet the city departments and independent boards capital budget improvement requests. So the capital budget requests, or CBRs, will be presented to us in virtual sessions or as the city permits an in-person resumption of in-person meetings, perhaps after May 1st, 2022. And so the information we're going to review today is our purpose, scope, and history. We're going to take a look at our bylaws, policies, and procedures, the fact that we are subject to the city's ethics ordinance, the structure of our committee. If members have not already been provided, we will ask that you receive the CLIC bylaws and the CLIC policies and procedures manual, review our schedule for 2022, schedule of meetings, talk about our joint public hearing with the Planning Commission, as well as the public info session that we're looking at having at the Minneapolis Community Connections Conference on May 21st, and look at the project ratings schema and the process for developing narrative comments that go into the CLIC report. We'll hear a presentation from the city staff on their role. We'll talk about our 6-year capital improvement program. We'll review the process for 22, hopefully from your perspective as a member. And we'll certainly take questions and comments and concerns. Next slide. Excuse me. So today's presenters, Vice Chair Willie Bridges, Eric Wan, Human Development Task Force Chair, and John Bernstein, Transportation Chair, as well as the Vice Chair of each task force, Jocelyn Beard and Katie Jones. And we'll have the CLIC Executive Secretary, our Budget Director, Amelia Kruber, and budget staff. And you have the contact info there as well as in their presentation. Next slide. So our mission is to advise the mayor and city council on recommendations for a 6-year capital improvement program. This is an excerpt from the bylaws that were adopted in 2019. Next slide. To be clear, also from our policies and procedures from 2019, it's not the CLIC purpose to evaluate the community development, economic development, or housing projects that typically occur in conjunction with departments like community planning and economic development. However, if there are capital improvements that are considered pertinent to such developments, those may fall under the purview of CLIC. Next slide. So you have the information about our we'll actually be looking at 2023, 2028 for development of recommendations. We'll just go on to the next slide. So CLIC has been established in the Code of Ordinance of the city. As some of the members who have been here a longer period of time, best we can determine, we find documentation back to the 1950s. And so the Click committee is appointed, as you all know by now, 33 members, 2 from each council ward, and then 7 appointed at large by the mayor. And so you can see the purpose and capital is defined. Next slide. The Click Committee's work is always of interest to the public and the media. And so the purpose of this slide, which we did from the pickup truck, but it's still very pertinent. So remember that we're all appointed. We are not the ultimate decision makers who are the elected officials, the mayor and council. We have in our basically our bylaws and our policies and procedures that nobody really speaks for the entire clique except for the chair typically, and the chair should be designated to do so by the full body. So just remember that we're all appointees, we're all stakeholders, ratepayers, taxpayers, and so we are we just should be mindful of our role as advisory members to the council and the mayor. Next. As a longtime member of the Click Committee, having served on the Click under 4 council members now, and I've seen a lot of changes over the years. We now have the 6-year capital improvement program. I think when I joined the Click, I think we were just newly getting into having a 5-year CIP again. And so they actually took those off the clay tablets and put that onto paper at that time. But anyway, the Click report is our major deliverable that we have for the mayor and the council. And so it's really, it's a collaborative work of everyone. It's really critical that we all bring our knowledge and experience, our skills and abilities, our life experience to the committee process. And we submit the narrative comments, and that we look at the materials presented and provided and render our best recommendations individually and collectively to the development of this annual Click report that is our key deliverable. You can see last year this was June 21. Next slide. Okay, so we are we'll be talking with the Planning Commission chair and staff. We have typically had a time certain later in the evening, more along the 6 p.m. time. So as Click chair, I'll be reaching out today or tomorrow to that body for looking at adjusting the time. Apparently Finance was told by the Planning Commission staff that the Planning Commission needed us to be time certain at 4:30 on Thursday, May 12th. So that is what appears in our calendar. A side comment is, in my perhaps 25 years on the Click Committee, we've had ups and downs in terms of public participation at this joint public hearing. We have had, I think in one instance, upwards of 70 people when there was perception by the public related to an East Phillips community project that we were the ones to come to be heard. And then other times we've actually had 0 public participation, sadly. And so it ends up being a conversation between the Click members and the planning commissioners. Ideally, we want to have a robust public participation. So members and staff will work with neighborhood and community relations to make sure that our neighborhood organization and cultural community organizations are informed of the time and the date, and that stakeholders are able to attend. We have tried to open up the process somewhat with written comments and pictures and other data that helps inform our process. And then since there is a resumption of the in-person Community Connections Conference, I am suggesting that we utilize that Community Connections Conference on May 21st to have members who are comfortable doing so table at the Minneapolis Convention Center at the conference. I have tabled many times at the Community Connections as a former Neighborhood and Community Engagement Commissioner. And there are literally hundreds of people who attend that conference. Very good for us as volunteers and people who have decided to engage in an advisory board and commission to demonstrate that process for other residents and the opportunity for networking and social capital building and other benefits that we may achieve through our participation as a member of an advisory board or commission, as well as informing the public about our process. So look for more details to come. Next slide. So you should be receiving, if you have not already, the CLIC guidelines and rating process. So we do have a document that will contain the city goals, the evaluation criteria, and the rating summary. So we have the schema that we will be using. Transportation Chair John Bernstein will be going into more detail on the rating schema as part of our presentation today. So I'm not going to get into minute detail on this. Next slide, please. And then at the end of our process, once our committee has heard, vetted, deliberated, made all of its recommendations, the CLIC Executive Committee meets with the mayor and staff to present the CLIC report, as we did virtually July 29, 2021 with Mayor Fry and staff. And so that's more the conclusion of our process. So I'm happy at this point to transition to Vice Chair Willie Bridges for the remainder of the Chair Vice Chair presentation.
Okay. Review the CLIC bylaws and governance roles of the CLIC Executive Committee. The membership, as you all know, it's 2-year terms that's there. And the Executive Committee and the Chair and the Vice Chair, Transportation Chair and Vice Chair, Human Development Task Force and Chair and Vice Chair. Next slide, please. The governance and CLIC's bylaws. You all should have had the bylaws of the CLIC, the process, the policies and procedure. Please look at those that you will understand, that you have some understanding. And if you have any questions, you can ask any of the chairpersons of the various, the transportation and the human resource or the chair or vice chair, those questions, but we would like for you to look over the bylaws and policies and procedures. Next slide. As the chair mentioned, these are open meetings. We open the meetings to the communities. At this time, we're recording. Hopefully, we're hoping that we will see each of you in person come May. That's the possibility of looking at that. So hopefully we'll have face-to-face contact in May. But these meetings are open to the public. Compliance with our ethics and in the ethics, that's very important. Meetings and the presentation. Next slide. All of you CLIC members basics, the complete ethics government training. The new members should have those trainings, and you can check with the staff with the ethics training. That's very important that you do that you get that taken care of. And we all have to do that with the city clerk, but the staff will let us know the date, the process, how to get that taken care of. Next slide. CLIC's the committee presentation and task force meeting schedule. You all have a schedule of our meetings. I would strongly suggest that you get those dates on the calendar. And one of the things that I want to stress is important that we all try to attend all these meetings. It's very important that we attend these meetings. If you can't, important that you do attend all the meetings. Next slide. again, this is a community engagement. What we've done in the past, we have met in the various community on North Side and South Side. And this year, as Jeff had mentioned, we're going to try to meet in downtown at I think this year is going to be at it will be at the convention center. That's where they usually have it. That definitely try to make those. But if we have the meetings out in the communities, please try to make those, because community people at that time have an opportunity to ask questions of us. Next slide. The principles of the community, they have a right to be involved. Contribution is very, very important. Recognize the need of all. Seek out involvement, participate in design participation, adequate information, no effective in participation. A lot of times what's important is that this gives the CLIC members an opportunity to hear what the community have to say. And also it gives them the opportunity to ask questions of us. And that's important that we hear the voice of the community. As we all know, we represent the good of the whole, and that's the city of Minneapolis. So it's important that we hear the voices of the community. Next slide. One of the things that we're talking about, and then the city staff will talk more about this, and this is the racial equity, how we look at the process and scoring, how we take all this into consideration as we score and look at the need of the various communities. Again, the staff will talk more about the equity of services throughout the city of Minneapolis. Next slide. One of the things that's important, we do get, as again, I'm repeating this, it's so important that we have community involvement. As those dates are coming up, you will know the dates. Please let the community know that we'll be at those 3 places, North, South Side, and at the fair that's going to be in May, that we'll be there. And invite the community to those meetings. It's important that we communicate what we're doing to the community. And one of the ways that this happened is that, again, North Side, South Side, you got your various community organizations, you got various community things going on. Please let them know the dates, and you will get those dates to be at those meetings. It's important that we get the community engagement. Next slide. And, thank you for attending. Looking forward to this year. Again, hopefully in May, we will see each other in person. So we're really looking forward to the May. You figure 2 years, members who've been around, we've done this virtually. Hopefully we'll get to see each other in May. Jeff, back to you.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair. So now we'll segue, trying to keep this moving because of our limited time today. So pleased to have the Minneapolis Finance and Property Services team supporting CLIC take over and present their information.
All right. Well, I'm Neil Younghans. I'm the principal budget evaluation analyst in the Office of Finance and Property Services. From the city side, we have Amelia Cooper, the director. Robert Harrison is the budget manager. Justin is a budget analyst, and Lindsay is our new capital budget intern. So we'll between the 5 of us, we'll be supporting the CLIC and capital process this year. Justin, would you mind moving on? So I'm going to cover for just from the city side here, the agenda is the role and function of finance and property services, the 22 through 27 CLIC recommendation versus council adopted, the net debt bond resource levels for 23 through 28, and then the federal infrastructure bill update. And then I'm going to turn it over to Amelia to talk about the racial equity in the capital budget process. And then we have some, Justin will have some information on the logistics going forward with the CLIC process. So you can move on to the next. Yeah, there you go. So Jeff mentioned this earlier, or is in Jeff's slides, but CLIC is appointed under Chapter 35 of the Municipal Code. That is also where the Finance and Property Services has designation to the Chief Financial Officer. The Chief Financial Officer for the city chooses or designates a executive secretary for the CLIC process, as well as appropriates resources for the capital and CLIC process. So Finance and Property Services staff are here to support and give guidance and financial advice to the committee, as well as kind of stewarding through this 6-year capital budget annually. And so we, as far as like guidance and support and advice, we give this to all our stakeholders in the process of building the capital budget. And so for this committee, we help administrate it, and then we also provide analysis and information on resource levels. So we kind of give like that advice in the background. And so for phases, we'll be moving along this year. So we're in the department request phase. So that's the beginning of the year where departments have just been submitting their requests into our OpenGov system. Now we're in the CLIC phase, and which will wrap up around July. And then the mayor will recommend a budget, capital budget in early August, and then in council will adopt a budget in December. So that's kind of our process with CLIC and the capital budget. So for 22 through 27, this is what ended up going into the council adopted CIP. So if you remember, the 2022 is the year that we are appropriating money and authorizing bonds. So that is the year of, the rest of it is actually the capital planning period. So for the entire 22 through 27 period, there was a total of $1.15 billion planned or appropriated or authorized. A very large chunk of that was for public works, which was $185 million. $15 million was for MBC. Park Board was $13 million, and $16 million was public grounds and facilities. So you can move on to the next slide. So I'll briefly go over this. I know it sounds like Eric is going to go over this in his presentation as well. But for the 2022 CLIC versus council adopted budgets, last year the council adopted 92.7% of the funding recommendations from CLIC's recommendations. So CLIC recommended $217 million in projects, and council adopted $233.7 million. The projects that contributed mostly to the difference, there was a few smaller things in there, but the large differences were MBC 12, which was the safety improvements and non-stage work areas for $4.9 million, MPD 04, which is the new first police precinct for $6 million, PSD 21, Hiawatha Training and Recruitment Center for $4.872 million, and PV 108, which was the Concrete Streets Rehabilitation Program for $3.134 million. And so that's just for 2022. So if you haven't already, you can go to our council adopted budget and go in and see see the decision tree of where which projects were submitted and which ones CLIC recommended, which ones the mayor recommended, and which ones were ultimately adopted. So that is in the city's capital budget. Debt bond resource levels. So this is an interesting area right now since the city is moving to the strong mayor system. So as council and mayor are going through a government restructure, traditionally we would bring this process through the council, and this year we're bringing it directly to our debt director and our bond council. So in 22 through 27, there was authorized $349 million, or planned and authorized $349 million in net debt bonds, and for 2023 through 2028, there was an increase in the total program of like 2%. So we moved from $348.6 million to $355 million. So we're based on the guidance we've received from our debt director. 2028, we'd be adding $64 million as a target. And there you go. So for the federal infrastructure bill, Minnesota was estimated to net more than $6 billion in federal funding over the coming years. That includes $4.5 billion for highways, $818 million for public transportation, $680 million for water infrastructure, $302 million for bridge replacement and repairs, $100 million for broadband internet, $20 million for wildfire prevention, $17 million for cybersecurity. So some of these things are directly related to some of the functions of the city. We don't have a strong update yet. The last I had heard, it was still at the state level, and they were trying to figure out which, if old programs were going to be funded or new programs were going to be funded. But we're still kind of in a standstill in this. I suspect that as we keep going along in the click process, that we'll find out more. But as far as we know right now, this is kind of where we're at. And then I can turn it over to Amelia.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Neil. And thank you, Jeff, for that introduction. I'm Amelia Kruger. I'm the budget director at the City of Minneapolis. I'm the executive secretary of CLIC. I'm here to give a presentation about race equity in the capital budget process, but also start with some grounding assumptions and a little bit of a look back at how we've been incorporating racial equity in the work we do in the budget office. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you, Justin. So learning objectives for this portion of the orientation is what goals or policies does the city have around equity? How does the budget process support these equity goals? And then specifically, what role does CLIC play in supporting those goals? Go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. So before we get started, these are 3 grounding assumptions that I just want to mention. The first is that race matters. So we know that some progress has been made over the years when it comes to racial equity, but particularly in the city of Minneapolis, when you look at measures of success around income, education, health, criminal justice, significant differences in outcomes based on race remain deep and pervasive. And so I just want to start with that grounding conversations because of our desire to create equitable outcomes. The second one is that we aren't just talking about specific and individual acts of bigotry or speech when we're talking about racial inequity or racism. We are talking about institutions and systems that perpetuate inequity. I think a great example of this, especially for folks that are interested in capital and infrastructure, was when Pete Buttigieg, I still can't say his name right, was announcing the federal spending on infrastructure. And I think there was a lot of misunderstanding and sort of jokes made about the story he told about a racist bridge. That story is a really powerful one because it shows how local decisions made about how and where and when to build infrastructure had an impact on BIPOC and Black communities in particular. And so that story from the summer, if you didn't hear about it, I encourage you to Google it. It's a really powerful example of how local decisions and infrastructure decisions are part of a system that can promote equity or can deepen those divides. And then the last piece is just to start with an assumption and an expectation that we have a responsibility in advancing racial equity. I think that, speaking for myself as a white woman, there in the past has been a strong tendency to think about discussions of race as though you are walking through a museum and looking at a picture on the wall about race in America, and then you continue to walk. And one thing that I just want us to just ground this conversation and then think about is that we are in the picture as well. We are not walking by. And so these are sort of the 3 things that we were carrying through from our partners in the race equity department at the City of Minneapolis, but I think are important grounding principles before we get into a discussion about how we bring race equity into our budget process. So go ahead and go to the next slide. These are definitions that have been adopted by the City Council around race equity and equity, so I'll just put them up here. But race equity means the development of policies, practices, and strategic investments to reverse racial disparity trends, eliminate institutional racism, and ensure that outcomes and opportunities for all people are no longer predictable by race. Equity means fair and just opportunities and outcomes for all people. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So when we are talking about the formal frameworks for thinking about racial equity of the city, this is really the main one, the Strategic Racial Equity Action Plan. It stems from work started in 2017 with an ordinance by City Council. There was strategic planning efforts that culminated in some operational and policy priorities. I would encourage you, if you haven't spent any time on our city's website, looking at all of the materials, highlighting those specific goals and program areas, to do so. It's really rich data that was created by the team in race equity, and has had a profound impact on the work that we do at the city, as you'll see in the next couple slides. So I think that's just a good resource for you to dig into, but now we'll talk specifically about budget. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So starting in 2020 is when we started formally bringing in race equity analysis to the budget process. In 2020, we needed to do something rather unprecedented with the budget, which was go in mid-year and make cuts to spending. This was brought on by the expected and then the crash in revenues around sales taxes and others related to the coronavirus pandemic. In the middle of that year, we are also seeing projections for city spending increasing related to the murder of George Floyd and the unrest that followed. So the city was in a very stressed financial situation, and we had to engage in mid-year budget cuts, which is not something that we had done. So to make sure that we were cutting in a way that was not blind to racial equity issues, we started asking departments to submit cut proposals that included an analysis of who would be impacted, what data do they have about racial equity around those impacted communities. And we use that data to make cuts. And so we went in and asked departments to complete that analysis. We sent it over to council. Council and the mayor included that analysis in their decision-making in those mid-year cuts. In 2021, which was about a month after the mid-year budget cuts, when we were planning for the full annual budget for 2021, we just put a lot more structure around that process. So we started using the formal race equity impact analysis questions that our partners in race equity had developed in the budget process, as well as in the legislative process. So in 2021, we were looking at another year of deficits where we needed to ask our departments to make cuts in the budget. We asked departments to submit scenarios for cuts to their budget, and with each scenario to describe the impact on racial equity of those cuts. And so those were used in discussions with the mayor's team. Those were used in council, received all of that information as they started their deliberation of the budget. And when we had that full picture of the whole year's budget, I think we were able to really be actionable with that information. And one example I'll give you about how this impacts the operating side is our Department of Regulatory Services. One area where they would have to cut, given the high target that we started with, was in response to properties that are dilapidated. So grass growing all over the place, weeds and things like that. That was a contract, so it would have avoided a layoff. And so I think had we not used the racial equity impact lens, that would have looked like an attractive place to cut. But our team in Reg Services looked at the data about where that work is happening, and overwhelmingly a cut to services there would mean a cut to services in low-income and BIPOC communities. So we were able to take that information, restore that budget and not include it in the cut, and move forward with cuts that wouldn't have had such a direct impact in exacerbating racial inequity. So that was the 2021 budget. In 2022, we were looking at a scenario where we were no longer in a phase of cutting budgets, we were adding back. And so we maintained the racial equity impact questions that we had in the 2021 budget process. We also added a discussion of narratives to every program at the city that asked departments to discuss the racial equity impact of what are they doing in a day-to-day business. I think in the budget, a lot of time is spent on the new spending, but that is just a tiny fraction of the ongoing spending that we're doing on what we would call a base budget. So we brought a discussion of racial equity into those narratives that are not just talking about the new stuff, but the old stuff too. And then in 2022, as a part of this CLIP process, we have added the same questions that we're doing in the legislative process, that we're doing in the annual budget process, are now going to be a part of the capital budget process. So departments are I believe, still working away at those capital budget requests, and they will need to answer those same questions that are around racial equity impact analysis in capital budget requests. I see a question. I'll pause for a question. Go ahead, Amity.
Thanks. This is really helpful, and I appreciate it. I have a question about what you just said, where the CBRs will include the same REIA questions. Who
Yes.
bottom lines the departments who are filling out the CBR so that they answer those questions?
Whoa, what a good question. I think it's us. So actually, let me get to the next slide because it is talking directly about it, and then I'll follow up if you have any more questions after that. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Justin. And I think the next slide, there we go. So what do we do after they complete the information around the racial equity impact questions? Though the answers to those questions are meant to inform your overall assessment of the project, but also specifically your ranking using the equity criteria, which is a part of the. It also should inform the comments that you make. So in terms of CLIC's role in this process, I think that the data that you get from departments can inform those things. It can inform the overall ranking you give it. It can inform specifically the equity criteria, comments. There also is a time to do question and answer with departments. And that's another time to ask these good questions. And if there are lacking or additional things that you want more information about, to ask those questions there too. And I'll pause and go to Neil.
Yeah, so I was going to say, we already started getting information back from departments for our CBRs, so they've already been entering in their narrative information. And so this year, we're trying to do a better job of getting, if we see that there's like an answer that doesn't seem like it's fully fleshed out, we're trying to go back to them and get better information from them this year, where I don't know if we had the capacity to do that in prior years. So I'm hoping through this process, we'll be able to like pull out some of those issues that you're highlighting, Amity, of some departments not necessarily like answering completely.
And I think, the continuing to ask that question, and when you're talking to your council member about your time on CLIC, talking about your experience and what kind of information you're getting and what kind of information you're looking for, sharing that with us, sharing that with departments when we talk about it. I think that's also a really powerful tool, just to make sure that we are improving every year and getting better information so that the decisions made can be made with an accurate understanding of how this impacts racial equity in particular communities in the city. So if we could go to the next slide, I don't know, Justin, if you can pull up that example. But this is just a sample of what we're going to get back with those new questions. And so I think there's a lot of scrolling here because we've packed in a lot of information. This is a park board capital budget request. We are including some more information around asset management. And then here we go. So the racial equity impact analysis you'll see on your screen here. And this, I think, is like still a week or so away where you guys will have access to all of the CBRs, but oh, lovely. Thank you, Justin. But the first question is just who is going to be impacted and what do we know about the racial makeup of those communities that are impacted? And you'll see the park board has done a great job of getting really robust information about the folks around this project. What does available data tell you about how constituents from BIPOC communities currently relate to the desired outcomes? What data is available or missing? And I think that question is really helpful to us as we think about how to improve the data that we get here in the long run. What's missing and what can we do about data is available each year that we're digging into this. There's a question about community engagement. So we're asking them, what have they done on the front end to engage with the community so that you guys will know, you know, this is something that this is what has happened before it's come to me. And then an analysis about what does the outcome for this project help achieve in terms of racial equity. I'll pause it and toss it to Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Amelia. Here's a quick question. The park board has been our sort of model of the best analysis. Have any of these examples been shared with the other department heads so that they know what is possible and the type of data mining that can be accomplished if they learn from the model that the park board uses? That's my question.
Well, so we have not even, I don't think the due date has yet passed for collecting CBRs yet. I think we certainly can do that once that happens. This is the first year that we've used these robust questions. We had something last year that wasn't quite as thorough, so we definitely can do that. The other thing I'll say is that departments in the city have been answering these questions anytime they bring something through the legislature, anytime they bring it through council. And RCA often requires this. So I'm hoping that there is some muscle memory there that will allow folks to start with a good head start this year. But I think that's a great idea, and we can do that after we start collecting those CBRs formally.
Great, thank you.
Hey, John has a question.
Go ahead, John.
Thank you. I'll make this really quick. I'm really glad to hear you guys are following up with the requesting departments when stuff is incomplete. Since you're talking about racial equity specifically, I just want to make sure that that's great that you're doing that on racial equity. I hope you're doing that across the entire CBR.
Yes.
In all questions. Okay, great. Thank you.
We are, and this is another area where we are in the budget office. Just something we're trying to do in general is a lot more cross training and bringing other folks that don't touch the capital budget all the time in to help us have another set of eyes on these projects and giving some feedback to them early in the process. All right, so I believe that is the end of my presentation. I'm going to hand it back over to Justin, I believe. Or Neil will correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes. No. Thanks, Amelia. This is Justin. Just while we have the CBR up, John, Eric, you had really good questions, and we focused on the racial equity impact analysis. Just a note for CLIC members, as you see these CBRs, as we're collecting them from departments and hope to distribute them to you all soon, these CBRs, the template itself was updated this year. So city goals are listed in a different format. You'll see a new asset management and asset condition project investment section. Departments are doing a lot of work on updating the entire CBR as well, and not just copying over from last year. So this year's are updating an existing CBR. So all of the CBRs you all will receive this year for consideration have this new template, and each have been updated by departments across the board. So that's just one thing I wanted to note that you'll see as departments are actively finishing those up, and we hope to distribute them to you soon. So I'll continue in our presentation here. A lot of this was already touched on, so I don't want to be too repetitive, but just want to hold some space for just logistics as CLIC gets going again this year. Meetings, as you know, as you found your way here, we are still on Teams in a virtual capacity. That will continue for the time being. As Neil mentioned, we defer to the city clerk's office and policymakers on the timing of an eventual return to in-person meetings. The city council is beginning that transition now with their meetings. They'll then look at independent boards or independent bodies to transition, hopefully in April, with boards and commissions possibly returning in May. Again, this is all still up in the air, and we'll move through this process and we'll flow through the city clerk. And we will share that information as we get that from them. Right now, because remote participation for boards and commissions is the current directive, all of our meetings for this year have been set up in Teams, and you should have received invites for them. If that changes and we go back to in person, we're already starting to make preparations for that. We will update calendar invites, we'll communicate to you kind of next steps. Parking comes into play with parking reimbursements. So all of that is being considered at this point. We just don't have enough information or a timeline for when that transition will happen. But wanted to preview as those conversations are ongoing. As a reminder, if you are going to miss a meeting, please just let staff know. That helps as we're doing roll calls. If we know in advance that you're not going to be attending, and as we seek to have quorum at all of our meetings. Many, if not all of you, are returning members or will be newly appointed members, but for those of you returning, we have several resources that you can use. We have an email list. That's how we send out the meeting invites. That's how we communicate to you all in advance of meetings. If you reply to those meetings, just a housekeeping note, that often does go to everybody on Click. So if you're looking just to reply to staff, feel free to just email Neil directly or email all of the city staff directly, rather than replying all to any of the emails that are distributed. That's the same for calendar invites. When you RSVP, that does go directly to staff, but if you reply to a calendar invite, the default is likely to go to the entire email list for Click. We have our same SharePoint site that you all should still have access to, and that link was included in one of Neil's recent emails. If you need any assistance with accessing the SharePoint site, please just reach out. We'd be happy to walk you through, make sure you do have access, and point out some of the key features of that resource. We do try to share relevant information through email, either before meetings if it's going to be discussed or after meetings if there are helpful resources, but that's just an easy way for us to distribute a lot of documents, to maintain resources, and then to link out to other resources as well. So these meetings are currently being recorded and posted on YouTube. There are links to the recordings from 2021. We'll be posting these recordings there as well. There are links to the budget, to different clerk documents and other resources, the LIMS system that the clerk's office uses. We have links there to previous Click reports. Just all of that is centrally located in that SharePoint site, and that just is a little bit easier than navigating through many emails. Go ahead, Rich.
A quick question. Somebody mentioned earlier that these meetings were available to the public. Do you just mean that they are posted after we're done, or is the public actually invited to these live meetings?
Good question. So per open meeting law, the public is invited to attend any of the board and commission meetings. So we do have a dial-in number for all of our Teams meetings that is on the agenda and on the LIMS website. So any members of the public who wish to attend right now can use that dial-in feature to attend the meetings. When we do go to in-person, the meeting location will just take the place of that conference ID, but members of the public are welcome to attend. Currently, we are also posting the meeting recordings on YouTube as a means to increase transparency as we're in a virtual setting.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So one other item, the capital budget requests that we discussed, we're actively working with departments to collect those, to review those, to ensure that you all have the information you need as you consider those proposals. We're also working on the presentations that departments will be providing. We're going to have those pre-recorded again this year. We're hoping departments are going to submit those soon. And we did hear your feedback from last year. The schedule was quite tight from when CBRs were distributed, presentation recordings were distributed, to then you all turning around and having to do your rankings and prepare for the Q&A sessions. So we've worked with departments to get that information as far in advance as we can, so we can get it to you early. So you're prepared, you have time to review all this information, and then we'll have the Q&A sessions, and those are listed on the schedule. There'll be 4 Q&A sessions. We did get rid of the Saturday session, so we'll have 3 kind of regular meetings and then the longer Friday meeting to do the Q&As with departments after you've seen the pre-recorded presentations from them. Go ahead, Eric.
You're on mute, Eric.
Oh.
Eric, you're on mute.
Thank you, Justin. So a question regarding ex parte communications. Could you speak for a second about what that means under the Open Gov laws and how we can, whether or not we can have conversations outside of planned meetings regarding any of the projects that we're discussing?
Yeah, I could probably get some additional information. I think just kind of to summarize, if there are going to be meetings of CLIC members that kind of go towards a quorum, then those discussions need to be taking place within a regularly scheduled meeting, and or we would need to work with the clerk's office to post that that sort of a meeting is going to take place. Currently, the meetings that we have are meetings of the full body, our regular meetings, and then the two recognized task forces, transportation and human development. We have quorums established for both of those. Those meetings are open to the public. Any agenda setting meetings, so like when the executive board gets together prior to meetings to set the agenda or to discuss internal affair items in preparation for a meeting, those aren't per open meeting law open to the public, but the vast majority of the work that CLIC does is part of the regular meetings, can be attended by the public, including the public outreach that you all do. If CLIC members have questions for staff, if CLIC members on their own have conversations about different projects, or if you all end up arranging kind of tours, that's something that there's been interest in. Those things aren't considered regular meetings where a quorum of the body is gathering together to discuss the work of the body.
Great, thank you.
All right, final slide. Just our contact information. Again, we're all on the call here. If you need to reach out to any of us, please don't hesitate. Neil has listed his contact information there too. You're going to see most emails come from Neil, but we're all available and accessible if you have questions as we continue on this year. I'll turn it back over to Chair Strand.
Thank you, Justin. So next we have item 5, Human Development Task Force presentation. So Chair Eric Wan, Vice Chair Jocelyn Beard, and we have about 25 minutes left in our meeting.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Strand. I get the hint. Thank you to Neil for covering most of the information that we needed regarding last year's decisions. This is to follow up on what Vice Chair Willie Bridges said about the known effects of participation. I would strongly recommend you go to look at that capital budget, because you will see makes and the council makes. We are having an impact. That's very important. A second piece to that is how important the comment section is. The comment section clarifies what we do in the budget in a very, very important way, and I'll give you a specific example. For the past couple of years, we have given the police department zeros on capital investments, not because we didn't want them to make capital investments, but rather that we felt that there was a lack of guidance on where the city was heading with policing. And so our notes, our comments within the CLIC report makes that clear. And in further discussions with the mayor, when we had our meeting subsequent to the CLIC's recommendations, we were able to clarify. And if you look at the capital budget, the mayor indeed put money back in with our guidance for both the first precinct and the third precinct. So you'll see where we put in zero, the mayor put $6 million, in that case, $9 million. And it was actually consistent with the guidance we were giving the mayor regarding having a clear vision of what policing looks like in the future. So yeah, that's about all I have to add right now, other than welcome everyone back. We only have one new addition to the Human Development Task Force, and I believe, is that Michael? And hopefully he'll get through the confirmation process quickly and will be able to join us in our first discussions. With that, Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair Juan. Vice Chair Beard, anything?
No.
Thank you. And item 6, transport.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm not sure who in staff is controlling things, but if you can throw the presentation up, that'd be great. So advance to the next slide, please. So some of this you've heard before. I'll move pretty quickly here. Our purpose is to provide guidance to the mayor and city council on the roughly 120 infrastructure projects that will be part of the 6-year capital improvement plan. And more specifically, what we do is determine which projects best match the city's goals and priorities that have been established by both the mayor and the city council. And those goals and priorities, to a large extent, are summarized in the CLIC capital guidelines that hopefully everybody has received. We do not set nor try to redirect policy. That's the purview of the elected officials. We are an advisory board and our recommendations are not binding, but as you've heard, they tend to follow what we do relatively closely. I've been on a long time, but not all the way back to the 1990s, but my understanding is back at that period of time, there was a lot more horse trading around the budget, and CLIC recommendations weren't followed nearly as closely during that period of time as they are today. And, you know, even though we're advisory, the elected officials like to lean on what our report, particularly when they agree. So we say, because they will do that when there's agreement. Next slide, please. So just sort of big picture on the timeline. The month of April, we're going to be gathering information, and that's through these CBRs that you've heard about, which is the capital budget request form. Each department that has a project that they want funding for has to submit one of those, and we'll be able to see their presentation in the pre-recorded format that you've heard about, and then we'll get a chance to ask questions of them to try to gather more information about each of these projects. That's basically what we'll be doing in the month of April. In May, then we sort of divide, not sort of, we basically divide up into the task forces, transportation and human development. And there's a couple of tasks that we do. One is in the scoring, there's a couple of areas where we give guidance to each to all of us in our individual scoring, and I'll get into the details of that in a minute. The other thing that we do is we make comments about various projects that fall under each task force's purview. I want to really emphasize this. If you're on transportation, that does not mean that you can't make comments on human development projects. You are free to make a comment on any project that comes through. It just means you won't be sitting on the meeting where they deliberate and discuss the comment that you submit, but you are encouraged to make a comment about any project you want, whether it's the one that's on the committee you sit on or not. And they're just logistically, you just have to make sure you email it to the chair of the other committee. So that's May. And then in late May and early June, those comments come, the comments that have been drafted and approved by each task force come to the full board. Nothing gets in the report that's not passed by the full board. So those will be presented and deliberated as necessary and then passed by the full board. At that same time, additional comments get drafted. As we discuss things, as we talk about funding, things come up that may not have come up when they were at the task force level. So just because a comment doesn't come through a task force doesn't mean it can't be introduced later when we're with the full committee, which starts in late May and early June. And then the month of June is largely wrapping up those comments and making decisions about, number one, which projects get funded and how they get funded. We have to make the budget balance. So if we take the projects that we want to fund and just leave it at that, the budget won't be balanced. So we have to do some shifting around of what gets funding in which year to make the budget get fairly close to balance. And that's largely what happens in June. Next slide, please. All right, so these project presentations, for those of you that are either new this year or maybe even second year, keep in mind that people that have been around for a while, this was a 5-year process, is now a 6-year process. We've seen these 80 to 90% of these projects before. They're back again for year 2, year 3, whatever it is. So we're pretty familiar with them. We know where the sensitive spots were in the past, and we go right through those with our questions. We're not any smarter than anybody else. We've just seen this stuff before. It's overwhelming in year 1. It was 16 years ago for me, but I remember it. There's 120 of these projects that you're seeing for the first time, and you're doing this with a bunch of people that have seen this stuff before. So it's pretty normal to feel like you're a little bit lost or you're a little bit behind. And the reality is it takes a couple of years to come up to speed on this, where you sort of have it all in your memory banks and it comes back quickly and that sort of thing. So a couple of quick tips about this. I would recommend that you review the CBRs that are coming up in each week's meeting in advance. I wouldn't try to memorize anything, just review them, familiarize yourself with them. You'll quickly learn which parts of the CBR have really useful information and in some cases slightly less information. We had a task force that gave some advice to the city on revamping those forms. And as you heard, it's a new form this year, so hopefully some of that's been solved. Scribble notes as necessary so that you remember the things that you want clarification on. And if you feel like you need clarification on something, it's a darn good bet that there are other people that are feeling the same way. So don't be shy. Don't feel like you're the only one or that's okay, right? I mean, we were all there at one point. So don't be shy. Ask questions when you have them. Get things clarified. More than likely, there are other people feeling the same way. Next slide. All right, scoring. So there's a lot of stuff that we do collectively. One thing that you do each of us does individually is we all rate all 120 some odd projects. The one thing that each task force does that I alluded to earlier is we give guidance about project priority that you see up at the top there. All of the things that are in this scoring template are outlined with definitions in the Click Capital guidelines. Be sure you familiarize yourself with those really well, because you'll need that to understand, for instance, under level of need with project priority, the definition of critical, significant, important, and desirable. Those are defined in words, so you understand what they each mean. Each task force, I'll just talk about transportation, will go through the projects that relate to them and identify a project priority for each project, and if you skip down to contribution to city goals, which level of contribution to city goals each project meets. When you get the scoring template that we'll each do individually, which happens after we've seen all the projects at the end of April, about 5 years ago, we were required to stay within the range that the task force recommended. We changed that now. It's strongly recommended that you stay in that range. However, if you feel very strongly about a project differently than how the task force rated it, you are allowed to go outside of the range that was recommended. So if on project number 1, transportation said this project has a significant level of need, but you think it's critical, you are allowed to rate it up in the critical range. Otherwise, you should stay in that point range that's assigned to significant, which is that 41 to 50 that you see at the top of the slide. Go ahead, Rich, you have a question.
Yeah, I didn't ever figure this out last year. Last year was my first year. Are these scores that we're compiling shared in any way? Or do all the committee finally see is just our rankings from top to bottom? Are these scores just for our own worksheet?
Yeah, so that's one of the things I'm going to cover here. Yes, we each rank individually. Those are submitted via email directly to the department. They are then tabulated and averaged, and everything that we do as a task force is based on the average score for each project of the whole committee. The individual scores are confidential. They're not shared out. Even the executive committee doesn't see anybody else's individual scores. And it's always been that way. So you don't have to worry about somebody else on the committee seeing how you just chose to rank something. That's confidential information, and everything that we do as a committee is based on the average scores of the entire committee.
Okay, so just to clarify, in the end, we are sharing a score for each project and not simply a ranking.
That's correct. But yes, there will be a total score shared. They won't see all the fine detail here. So if you look at the bottom of this form, maybe can you scroll up a little bit or scroll down so they can see the bottom of the form? So the point system is out of 300 points. In the report, the projects will be ranked in order, and it will also show what the total score was for each project. And just a little bit more on the scoring system here. If you look at what's going on here, you sort of back up big picture. There's 3 boxes there. Each of those boxes totals to 100 points. So each of those sections is about 1/3 of the scoring. So up top, there's 2 things. The project priority that we talked about. You'll get guidance from each task force on where they think that should be ranked. And as much as possible, you should try to stay in that range. The second thing is consecutive previous years in the budget. We're trying to encourage good long-term planning. So a project that gets introduced, in the 6th year of the budget and then bumps up each year, that's what we're looking for, and they get points for that. As individuals, you do not need to worry about that. City staff, it's a factual thing. There's no opinion about this. Either it meets those criteria or it doesn't. So there's nothing that you have to do individually. The score sheet will come to you with that already identified by city staff. So that's the first third. I see Mike's got a question. Go ahead.
Mike's got his, Neil has his hand up first and then Mike.
Yeah, I was going to add on just that, like you were saying, John, that the scores are submitted to me and I compile all of them. But at the end of it, I do put together like a high level summary statistics just to see what are like variation across all of them. And so it's all, I mean, it's still all private information, but we can still see like where some projects are, where there is more variation across scores. So there is like that product at the end of our submission of the ratings. Just want to put that out there as well.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, John. This is great information, very helpful. So in the end, the number that we submit is our version of the perfect score, 300, in other words. So it'll be project X and then one number, or do we submit this entire sheet?
You submit this it'll be a worksheet that looks just like what you see here for every single project with a whole bunch of tabs on it. You score all of these, it will total for you, and all of that information gets submitted to Neil.
Thanks.
There are other hands up, but I can't see all of them.
Jeff, you got your hands up.
John, I just want to say, because it happens every year, you do not need to send your ratings to the click chair. If I get them, I will not open the file. I will just pass it on to the city staff, but it seems to happen every year. So you do not need to submit ratings to the click chair. And technically, this could be a fine point. I don't want to take too much time on it, but we are public body appointees. Arguably, what we submit, I suppose, could be discovered by the appointing authority or a public member seeking data. So I think the key is being, consistent and pretty much trying to adhere to the rating schema that we have all agreed to.
Yeah, when I said confidential, I meant among the committee. I've never heard of this going outside the committee, but the idea is not to, this is not information that gets shared amongst other members, including the chair, the vice chair, all the rest of. And to that end, also, as you read the definitions of these various things like critical, significant, important, desirable, of course, it's great if we all have the same view of that and score the same way, but we're 33 different humans that, that's probably not realistic. To the extent that you want to try to calibrate yourself with somebody who's been around for a while, I think that's okay. I think it's better to focus on being consistent yourself. So however you decide to view those, staying as close to the definition as you read it as possible, be consistent project to project. And the fact that you view critical slightly different than somebody else will all come out in the wash when we average 33 of these together. You'll see that there's some people are a little harsher, some people are a little easier. And when you go averaging 33 together, it should all work out pretty well. All right, just continuing quickly with this. So the top third, I mentioned the project priority and the consecutive years in the budget. Then that middle third is contribution to city goals. Again, that's one that you'll get guidance from the task force on. And then the other piece of that is operating costs. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. This one here, the idea is, when you invest in capital, there's ongoing costs to that. And even if you think it's a great project, if it has a cost, there, that takes some points away, and you should allow that to happen if that's the case. There's plenty of other places to reward a project that you think the city that has merit that the city ought to do, even though it has an operating cost, an ongoing operating cost. And then the final box down at the bottom, that's the qualitative stuff. You heard about equity. You can see there's some other components of that. Those, this is, like it says, it's qualitative, right? So a personal tip I would give you, when you see 25 points and 15 points, I try to move in 5-point increments. I just think it's easier. It's, when you use numbers like this, you can sort of have a false sense of precision around this stuff. If you use 5-point increments, and then if you're looking at the 4 projects that you gave 20 points to on equity, and you see one that you think is even better, you can bump it to 22 or 23 or whatever, something like that. I wouldn't get too focused on going number by number with this kind of thing. I think that can really bog you down. Again, you got 120 of these that you have to rate. One last thing on scoring. The individual ratings are due from everybody on May 19th. That's on the schedule. It's really important that you try to get those in on time. This is your voice. This is probably the strongest part, one of the strongest parts of your voice as an individual on the committee is your ratings. So make sure you get them done and make sure you get them in on time. Is there another hand up?
No.
Okay. So next slide. All right, task force meetings. We use a really loose version of Robert's rules. That's not to try to be formal and stuffy. It's mostly to make sure that people aren't talking over one another and everybody gets a chance to be heard and leaves those task force meetings feeling like they got heard and they didn't get railroaded. So again, a large part of what we do is assign project priority and contribution to city goals to each of the projects. And then the lion's share of our time in May will be around drafting comments. And you might want to make note as you're hearing these presentations or reading these presentations, if there's projects you feel strongly about or you've got some real questions, the direction the city's going with it, those are the projects to make a note that you'd like on. Sometimes comments are submitted individually, sometimes people work on them together. It can be any of those things. It's very helpful if you are able to draft comments in advance of the meeting. Typically, we collect those a few days before and then try to distribute them to people so that the meeting time doesn't get taken up by reading comments that no one has yet seen. And then towards the end of May, we try to finish the final project of the task force is approved comments that then get forwarded to the full committee for consideration. Next slide. So lots of information. I'm sure for some of you, I remember, there's even terminology. You're probably going, what the heck does that mean? I'm not sure I had heard the term net debt bonds before I joined this committee 16 years ago. And there's simple things like that where ask someone to explain what it is to you. A couple of resources for you online at the address you see there. You can find all of the CLIC reports going back to 2005. I'm not suggesting that you go read all of those, but perusing some of those and kind of seeing what the final project looks like, and that may help you sort of understand where we're headed with this. You can also see the actual capital budget requests that the city has been making going all the way back to 2008. Other resources, the veteran committee members, I didn't use old. I'll have you know, Willie, myself included. I won't speak for anybody else, although I'm sure that many others are happy to do this. I'm more than happy to entertain questions from people, spend time talking to you. I was going to put my phone number on this, but since this is a public meeting, I'd prefer not to do that. Everybody on the committee has we all have each other's email, so you can reach out to me via email, and I'm happy to do it that way, or talk to you on the phone or text or whatever your preferred method of communication is. And I mean that sincerely. So if there's anybody out there that would like further information about this, I'm more than happy to do that. And to the extent anybody wants to do it over a beer, I won't object. And then city staff is the other obvious resource for everybody as well. And so I see that's the end of my presentation, but I see Eric's got his hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to remind people that there's a useful resource, which are the comments from previous years. There's some projects that we've been asking asked the city to separate the gasoline from the electric charging stations for vehicles. And for the past 2 years, they have not submitted in that format. So if you read back in previous year's budgets, you're going to see things that you'll want to bring up again this year that may be important. So that's my ad. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, John. Thanks, Eric. We can change out the slide deck. So agenda 7, review our Click 22 process and logistics. So basically, in conjunction with city staff, we will develop a meeting agenda for each of the meetings. I believe the executive committee will be meeting tomorrow, Thursday, to go over the agenda for the next meeting on Wednesday, April 6th, noon to 1:30, where we'll have the mayor, council president, and budget chair presentation and review the 2023 to 28 CIP capital improvement program. Elections are not applicable because the CLIC term is a 2-year term and the officers are elected in the first year. So with that, were there other questions? I know we've had questions from members as we've gone along, but any questions, perceptions, reactions? I see Amity.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the member list. Are there any applicants for Ward 5?
So I was going to say I reached out to Councilmember Ellison a few weeks ago. The period for applications to be taken in from the clerk's office are still open, but I have not seen any applications come through yet.
Cool, thanks.
I should make mention, just so that members, you're all aware, the executive committee discussed. So as part of our presentation meetings, we have the 1.5 hours blocked off. Members who are returning will know that we have to have short meetings of the task force groups to assign group ratings. And so our conversation has been, we either need to end the presentations, say 15 minutes before 1:30, and then perhaps run the meeting to 1:45, or make it a 2-hour meeting and then do the ratings, group ratings for the 30 minutes. So whenever we have presentations, the practice has been longstanding that the task force that deals with that specific project or group of projects would do the group ratings right then at that time. And typically we try to get a rating spreadsheet out to members. So we're contemplating that staff would be able to provide that April 29th, which still gives members a full 3 weeks to do their ratings. Not sure what that was. I was getting a buzzing. So that's about where we are. Any additional questions? I think we're close to time, 1:29.
Jeff, can you see my hand?
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't. John?
I just wanted to clarify for people that the schedule's a little bit different this year. And whenever there's a little bit of change, there's always pros and cons of that. So we don't have those long grueling days, squeezing all the presentations into 2 full days. Instead, it's been divided up mostly into our 2-hour meetings, with the one exception of that Friday where we have the full morning. So that's a pro. The con that goes with it is now it's a little bit more challenging for each task force to rate, to do the project priority and contribution to city goals. My personal view is I think it's important for each committee to do that right after the meeting while it's all fresh in your head, especially for newer people where it's hard to keep all this straight, instead of waiting till all the presentations have been done and then trying to go through all the projects that relate to each committee. So my personal preference would be that each committee get a carve out of time on each day when those projects are presented to go through and do those contribution to city goals and project level priority. I think that would be, nothing's going to be perfect. My personal view is that's the best compromise.
Hey, Jeff, just a real quick thing. I really want to acknowledge Neil and Amity and Catherine. This summer we worked on with the staff on the racial equity, and we're still working with that. So I really want the committee to know that's what we're doing. That's what Neil helped us this over the summer, to make sure that was part of our discussion, that race equity is there. And we're also looking at the definition. So anyone who wants to work with Catherine Amity and I to look at that, please let me know. But and again, thanks Neil for your working with us and hearing Amelia talking about it, making it part of the discussion.
Thanks, Julie. Rich, final question or comment?
Yeah, I'll follow up on John's recommendation. I thought I inferred this from the schedule, but will we have in our hands both a copy of sort of the spreadsheet of all the projects that we can actually, and will that include also from each department, the department's recommended rankings? I believe that the departments have their own preferred rankings, and will we have those in our hands at the time we see the presentations?
So the department rankings will just show up on the CBR itself. So those will be available pretty soon. I think we're still kind of going back and forth with the departments to clean up some of that information, but that information should be on the CBR. And then John, I thought we were gonna, I don't know if you want to connect at some point. I don't know what your thought or the executive board's thought is on having a rating sheet earlier.
Yeah, so I'll jump in on that. So I recognize what you're asking, Rich, and it's a reasonable request. Here's the problem on the other side of that. If those spreadsheets go out early, what happens is there's confusion because there's multiple versions of it out there. Ultimately, the version that people are going to score from is going to be the version that you receive that indicates how each task force rated each project on contribution to city goals and level of need. That won't be available until April 29th after all of the presentations have been given. So our thought was it's best to not distribute that until that one is out. Otherwise, invariably what happens is people have multiple copies and it gets confusing. It's more challenging for city staff as well. Less than ideal, I know what you're talking about. Most of the information we need is on CBRs, and I think we can work from those. And as Neil said, the priority ranking by department is on the CBR. And just really quick on that, I would say that's an important input to look at, but that's all it is, right? We're not a rubber stamp committee, and I know you're not suggesting this. That's just one more piece to take in. Just because the given city department thinks one project's more important than another, you as an individual or we as a committee could have a different opinion.
Thing I could change from my first year last year is that I would have had some of this in my head before I saw those presentations. I had made the assumption that the presentation was a starting point, and what I discovered was by the time the presentations were over, like we were making decisions, and I didn't feel like I had enough time to really sort of go back to the beginning and sort it all out. So if I had some pre-sorted, sense of what these projects are and where they lie, and then I could think about that during a presentation, then it would be much easier for me to then come back to the HR committee and start from there rather than from zero.
Yeah, it's a fair point. This is very challenging, right? I think Eric operates the same way. I'll just say this quickly. One of the things we do with these projects when we're doing that task force ranking, since most of them have been seen before, we tell you how it got ranked the previous year. And that's not to say we've got to do the same thing. It's just to inform you about that, and it gives a starting place. And I think that helps a little bit. If you know how it was ranked before, then you can think, okay, is that reasonable? Do we want to change that? Do we have different information that says we should change that, or do we just move forward with that? And if you operate from that position, I think that might help with feeling like you're flailing a little bit, that you just got all this information.
Well, I'll do better this year. I'll be ready.
Well, I meant that for everybody, and especially for anybody who's new.
Okay, sounds great. One last point I put in the chat, the 2022 Community Connections Conference link. So as time permits, take a look at the neighborhood and community relations. So May 21st, we will tentatively be considering our public info session at that conference. And so with that, we have completed all the items on the agenda for this meeting. I will ask the members and staff if there are any other matters to come before this meeting. Seeing none. If not, without objection, I'll declare this meeting adjourned. Our next meeting will be Wednesday, April 6th, 2022 at noon. The executive committee will be scheduling a meeting for Thursday tomorrow. Great to see everyone. With that, we are adjourned, and thanks for attending the onboarding and orientation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.